Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC London, Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura. We saw some atrocious performances, we saw some terrible losses, and we saw some horrible fights in general. This was not the best card. I'm going to give you my opinion on who needs to be cut from the UFC after their performance at UFC London. And to be quite honest, this list doesn't even encompass every fighter I would get rid of from the organization. But these are the main fighters I believe need to be cut from the UFC after their poor performance on this card. And I have two on this list I'm actually going to save for the end that are going to be very, very shocking that I guarantee nobody is going to expect. Now, before I get into my list, the way I'm doing my list is basically the further you are up on the list, the more I believe you need to be cut from the UFC. Do me a favor before I even get into the list, comment down below. What were some fighters on UFC London that performed so badly that you believe they need to be cut from the organization? So starting off with a couple honorable mentions that don't necessarily deserve to be cut just yet, but I wanted to mention them because of their poor performance. First honorable mention is Herbert. Herbert took on Ziam, and this was just a horrible fight. He clinched nonstop. He really had nothing to offer. He basically tried to avoid the fight. And the fact that they put him in the UK, basically to put on a big performance for the hometown crowd. They gave him a favorable matchup in Ziam, and then all he did was basically hug the entire fight. You guys know me. I like grappling. I like clinch work. I like takedowns. I like jiu-jitsu. I'm not one of these guys that, oh, any grappling is bad. I want to see two guys strike. I don't care about that. This was a horrible performance by Herbert. All he did was clinch up the entire fight. Now, this is only a one-fight losing streak, so how are you going to cut him from the organization? His last fight was a draw. Fight before that, he got a win over Kyle Nelson. But after a performance like that, honestly, Herbert is walking on thin ice, and that's why I wanted to put him on an honorable mention. The next fighter I have is another honorable mention, and my last honorable mention, and that is Ketlen Vieira. Ketlen Vieira beat Pannie Kianzad, but Ketlen Vieira is just putting out horrible performance after horrible performance after horrible performance. Even in fights that she wins, she has no sense of urgency at all. All she did was take Kianzad down and literally lay on her. She didn't even throw any ground and pound. She occasionally looked for a submission. But if you're literally just taking fighters down and laying on them and essentially doing no damage, I don't want to see you in the organization. Now, the only reason she's an honorable mention is she's won 3 out of her last 4. And on top of that, the UFC just needs warm bodies at 135 pounds. But I never want to see Ketlen Vieira fight for a title. You know, she arguably won her last fight against Raquel Pennington where she lost via split decision. I thought she should have got the decision. But she lost that fight because she showed no sense of urgency in a fight that could have went either way. Probably should have went her way. But she just said, you know what? I'm just going to not throw any shots. I'm not going to attempt to do any damage. And she showed it again against Pannie Kianzad. She did it against Holly Holm. She just let Holly Holm control her up against the fence. She won a split decision there. So arguably, she could have lost her last 2 fights coming into this fight, and then she puts on this stinker where she just lays on the ground for the entire fight and doesn't even do any damage. Atrocious performance. That's why she's an honorable mention. Moving on to the actual list, starting off with the first cut I want to see after UFC London. And that is sadly Bryan Barberena. Bryan Barberena lost to Makhmud Muradov, got dominated in this fight. I mean, he can't grapple to save his life. And the fact that this is a blown up lightweight who used to fight at welterweight, kind of small for welterweight, had a little bit of success there, and now he's moving up to middleweight. I don't get it. He literally looked like a mini refrigerator in this fight. And he can't stuff a takedown to save his life. His striking has not improved for at least the last 5-6 years. He's been around forever. He's been in the UFC a long time. He's been in the UFC since 2014. It's hard for me to get rid of him. He's been in some fun fights. He had that fun fight with Robbie Lawler. That's ages ago at this point. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. He got dominated by Makhmud Muradov. And to be honest, I wasn't impressed with Muradov. You could cut him. I'm not going to throw him on the list. But the fact that he struggled so much with Bryan Barberena to hold him down when he was clearly the way bigger fighter, and the fact that he was gassing out in the 3rd round, and then there was the head clashes, and I just think Bryan Barberena, you know, he could go have success in another organization. People think, oh, I'm saying, oh, cut this fighter, cut that fighter. I want them to make no money. No, it's about the barrier of entry into the UFC, and Bryan Barberena could go have success in other organizations that aren't as deep as the UFC and have some of these crazy brawls. You know, he could go be like Roy Nelson and fight at the Kentucky State Fair or something like that. Bryan Barberena will always be fun. He has good stamina. He has okay striking, but he has no business competing in the UFC middleweight division. That just shows me that he's not committed, because realistically, he was small for welterweight. He should probably be fighting at lightweight. Maybe he can't make lightweight. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but 3 in a row. He got finished by Gunnar Nelson in the first round. He got finished by Rafael dos Anjos in the second round. Those aren't horrible losses to have, but the fact that you say, you know what, I got finished by Rafael dos Anjos, I got finished by Gunnar Nelson, I was losing the Robbie Lawler fight up until I got that win. You know, he was losing against Robbie Lawler, who just retired. He arguably lost the Matt Brown fight, and both of those guys are on the way out. I think it's time probably for Bryan Barberena to go. He's 34 years old, but to be honest, he fights like he's 44. I'm being honest. 3-fight losing streak. Go to Bellator. Go to another, organization that doesn't have the talent pool that the UFC has, and maybe you can have some success there rather than trying to fight guys on their way up in the middleweight division, 185 pounds. 185 pounds. How tall is he? He's 6 foot tall, 185 pounds. To be a peak fighter, supposed to be in peak physical condition to fight in the UFC, and you're fighting at 185 pounds at 6 foot tall, just doesn't add up to me. And honestly, he doesn't even look 6 foot tall. So I think Bryan Barberena, 3-fight losing streak, 34 years old, time to cut him from the organization. Moving up on my list of who needs to be cut from the UFC, next up is Shawna Bannon. She's 5-1 now. She got her first loss at UFC London, and she fought Bruno Brazil. And I know the commentary team, and in particular Michael Bisping, acted like this fight was competitive. It was not competitive at all. She looked horrible. She looked like she didn't belong in the UFC. And basically what this is the UFC was basically trying to build up some UK talent. She's from Ireland. The UFC wanted to get behind her. Conor McGregor's tweeting about her and saying, I thought she won the fight. She should get the decision 2-1. She lost all 3 rounds. You can make an argument for the 3rd round. She clearly lost the 1st round. She clearly lost the 2nd round. And she looked horrible doing it. The striking looked terrible. The grappling was basically non-existent. She got out-grappled in this fight, and that's supposed to be her strength. She's 5-1, and people are talking about, she had such a hard path to get to the UFC. I think Bisping said that. Her last win was against a girl who's 6-4. The fight before that against a girl who's 1-2. Then you get to a girl who's 3-0, 3-0, and then 1-1. Yeah, what a tough path to the UFC she had. She looked horrible against Bruno Brazil. And let's be honest, Bruno Brazil is bottom of the barrel herself. So I think it's time to cut Shawna Bannon. I'm going to discuss later in the video who I think will actually be cut by the UFC. But this performance at 115 pounds, 29 years old, it's not like she's 22. It's not like she's 23. She's 29 years old. We're getting a lot of like these Paddy Pimblets, type fighters where the UFC's only pushing them because they're from the UK. And they really don't have the skills to even match the very low barrier of entry in the UFC. The barrier of entry just keeps getting lower and lower and lower by the year. And Shawna Bannon, I wouldn't trust her to win a street fight, let alone a fight in the UFC. And the fact that she's out there fighting on this card, I think is an embarrassment. 5-1, only 1 loss. Get rid of her. She looked like absolutely horrible. The skills were not there. Moving up on my list of who needs to be cut, next up is Pannie Kianzad. She lost to Ketlen Vieira, couldn't defend a takedown to save her life, looked horrible in this fight. She had some okay striking early, and she's only on a 1-fight losing streak, but her last win was against Lena Landsberg. The fight before that, she lost to Raquel Pennington. And I know the UFC, again, needs warm bodies at 135 pounds in the women's division, but Pannie Kianzad, she couldn't stuff a simple takedown. She couldn't stuff a simple takedown. And then she just laid there as Ketlen Vieira did no damage and didn't do anything. She absolutely did nothing. Kianzad just laid there. She had a moment in the 3rd round where I think she reversed position and she ended up on top and she did do a little bit of damage. But outside of that, you can't stuff a takedown, not one. You can't stuff any takedowns. I just think, look at her overall record. She's 16-7. She's 31 years old. She's not particularly old. The record isn't that bad. But losing 2 out of your last 3 to Raquel Pennington and Ketlen Vieira, I know the women's bantamweight division is an atrocity right now. I know it's horrible. I know there's fighters towards the top of the division that have some of the worst striking I've ever seen in mixed martial arts. But Pannie Kianzad, I already said cut Ketlen Vieira. That's how lowly I think of her. So if you're getting 30-27 by Ketlen Vieira, I think it's time for you to be cut from the organization. Maybe she goes and builds her skills somewhere else and comes back because, you know, the bantamweight division, we know it needs help. But right now, I think she needs to be cut from the organization. I don't even want to talk about that fight anymore. I hated that fight. That fight was so incredibly boring. And the fact that you're just laying on your back, you don't have the ability to attempt to sweep. You don't have the ability to threaten with submissions. The fact that you're not even throwing shot. All else fails, at least throw elbows from the bottom. Please, do something. Don't just lay there. At this point, just tap out. Save us the pain of having to watch the fight. So Pannie Kianzad needs to be removed from the organization. Moving up on my list of who needs to be cut after UFC London, and this is somebody who is coming off a win at UFC London, and that is Daniel Marcos. Daniel Marcos beat Davey Grant via split decision at UFC London. I thought he lost this fight. Very close to a robbery. First round, basically nothing happened, and that's kind of the sticking point of why I can't outright call it a robbery, but it felt like a robbery in real time. Second round, basically nothing happened, but Marcos landed a couple jabs towards the end of the round. And then the third round, Davey Grant clearly won. Daniel Marcos was literally having no output in this fight. He wasn't throwing anything, and he was just basically blocking kicks from Davey Grant the entire fight. Davey Grant was way more active. And what really annoyed me about Daniel Marcos is, most people, I would say 90% of the MMA community going into that decision felt Davey Grant won that fight. When they read it as a split decision, Daniel Marcos was throwing his hands up like he couldn't believe it. His coach in his corner were acting like, this is so egregious that Daniel Marcos, this is a split decision. They were acting like he definitely won. And that really irked me because Daniel Marcos was not throwing anything in this fight. He was just doing nothing. He was just sitting there. He would block kicks. He wasn't throwing anything. Davey Grant is what, 36 years old, 37 years old, been in a lot of wars. He's the guy who was actually trying to fight. Say what you will about the entire performance. He wasn't landing a whole lot because it was just getting blocked and there was a lot of kicks to the body. But Daniel Marcos is just standing there basically running the entire fight, not attempting to fight. When you're avoiding the fight and you're the bottom of the barrel already, I think you need to be cut from the organization. He's undefeated. I think he's 14-0. Yeah, he's 14-0. He's 15-0 now. No, I don't want to see him fight again. Daniel Marcos, honestly, he almost took the top spot on this list because the way he acted when that split decision was read was he was acting, he had the same reaction as Johnny Hendricks did when Johnny Hendricks lost the decision to George St. Pierre, where a lot of people thought Johnny Hendricks won the fight. And he just, you know, he's like having this crazy reaction. His corner's like, can you believe? Yeah, we can believe it. Davey Grant was more active and you weren't doing anything. Basically, Daniel Marcos won this fight because he gave Davey Grant a bloody nose. At least that's what the commentary team would have you believe. And, you know, it's just ridiculous. Daniel Marcos, I never want to see him fight again. I really don't. In the bantamweight division, where we got levels upon levels upon levels of talent, we got guys who are amazing, who are unranked. I don't need to see Daniel Marcos in the bantamweight division ever again. Cut him from the organization. Now, moving on to my next cut. It's technically my number one cut, but I decided I'm going to save the two shocking cuts for last because they're kind of not really going to happen. But the number one cut that I have for UFC London, you could probably guess this, but it is Molly McCann. Molly McCann needs to be cut from the UFC. Molly McCann's horrible. She's 33 years old. She's 13-6. The UFC gave her a co-main event spot against basically the worst fighter they could conjure up in Julia Stoliarenko. And she got finished in the first round. She got finished 1 minute and 55 seconds into the first round and arguably got outstruck before this. It was kind of even on the feet, but I think you could make an argument that Stoliarenko landed the better shots. Then Molly McCann still has no takedown defense. She doesn't know how to sprawl. She doesn't know how to dig underhooks. She doesn't know how to defend a takedown, even though she's been fighting in the UFC since 2018. A lot of people don't realize that because they just known her for the last year when she's kind of riding off the coattails of Paddy Pimblett. But then she ends up in a bad position. She gives up her back the second she's taken down. She's like, oh, I'm getting taken down. I'm going to the mat. I have no jiu-jitsu. Let me just give up my back immediately rather than trying to get full guard or anything like that. She gives up her back. Then she essentially tries to kind of reverse to end up on top. She ends up in an armbar. And then because of the angle they're at, Stoliarenko's up against the cage. She has the armbar, but she can't really extend. Then you have Molly McCann say, oh, let me just jump into position where you can extend my arm and make me tap out. So she ends up basically with her feet sticking straight up in the air, tap into an armbar 6-7 times. And Molly McCann, I've been saying this for a while, she's not good. People think she's good because she beat Hannah Goldie. Hannah Goldie is horrible. They think she's good because she beat Luana Carolina. Okay, it was a crazy finish. but still not that great of a win. And look what happened against Erin Blanchfield. Look what happened against Erin Blanchfield, who actually is a good fighter. She got absolutely decimated. Absolutely decimated. And then Julia Stoliarenko, she just lost a fight to Chelsea Chandler recently. Got destroyed by Chelsea Chandler. And Molly McCann is just getting destroyed in the first round. It is amazing to me, and I feel like a lot of people are rooting against Molly McCann, but the reason people are rooting against her is because Barstool Sports has a relationship with her and Patty Pimlet, and basically Barstool Sports has somehow convinced people that she's good, you know, and she's actually not good, and a lot of the fans see right through it, and then the UFC's like, oh, we're going to give her a co-main event against a girl who's 10-7-1. Well, I guess she was 9-7-1 before this. I don't know if this was her current record at the time. I'm looking at Tapology right now, but either way, to have that many losses, 7 losses. Oh, she has almost as many losses as she has wins. Stoliarenko does. And Stoliarenko went out there and made Molly McCann look like she did not even belong. Now, you know, I know people are like Molly McCann's personality. I don't know how many people actually do, but supposedly they do because she's crazy and she'll prod around with a championship belt. She's not contender level. She's not even top 15 level. She'll never be championship level. She's been around for 5 years. She's 33 years old. She's 13-6. She's on a 2-fight losing streak. We saw the skill gap between her and Erin Blanchfield where she got absolutely wrecked in the first round in that fight. It's time for the UFC to part ways with Molly McCann. Now, before I get into my 2 cuts that you guys are not going to expect, let's go through the current list, and I'm going to tell you who I believe is actually going to get cut. Okay, so Jai Herbert, I don't think he gets cut. That's why he was an honorable mention. Ketlen Vieira, I don't think she gets cut. That's why she was an honorable mention. Bryan Barberena, I do believe that he does get cut. 3-fight losing streak. He's not much use for the UFC. Shawna Bannon, this was her first fight in the UFC. She lost it. She's from Ireland. She's not going to get cut. Pannie Kianzad, I think it's like 70-30 that she does get cut. I think there's a good possibility she gets cut, but the bantamweight division is lackluster, so they may keep her around. Daniel Marcos, he won. He's not going to get cut. Molly McCann, she's not going to get cut, even though she really actually does deserve to be cut. Now, moving on to my shocking cuts. The first one I have, and I know it's never going to happen, that's why it isn't technically on the list, and that is Michael Bisping from commentary. Michael Bisping is one of the worst commentary personalities I have ever heard. The guy makes corny jokes. The guy is oblivious to what's going on. I know he has one eye, but I'm not even sure he's watching the fights with his one eye. And he just says the most ridiculous things. He acted like Shawna Bannon against Bruno Brazil was close. It was not close at all. And he is clearly extremely biased towards the UK fighters. And it's just so apparent. It is just so apparent. And then you add on top of that, he's saying really ridiculous remarks like, yeah, I think Daniel Marcos may win it because he bloodied up Davey Grant's nose, and we know damage is everything. Like, he doesn't understand the scoring criteria, even though he's supposed to understand. He took courses, and he's always talking about the scoring criteria, but it seems like he never understands it at all. That visual damage and concussive damage isn't exactly the same when it comes to the scoring criteria. And then he's still talking about how, oh, this one takedown at the end of the round may win the fight for a certain fighter. He's horrible. He's horrible. He's horrible. He's horrible. I can't even think of all the different things that he said. I mean, oh, Shawna Bannon took the hard road to the UFC. He said that about a couple fighters on this card. I don't even remember every fighter he said it about. He said it about Shawna Bannon. I don't remember who else he said it about, but he said it about a couple fighters on this card. And I'm like, what is this guy even talking about? Does he watch the fights? Does he care? Michael Bisping is probably the worst commentator for the UFC. And I really wish the UFC would take him off the commentary desk. Moving on to my last cut, and this was not on the list because it's not going to happen in reference to the UFC London card, but we have to cut Chelsea Chandler. I can't forget that performance she had the week before UFC London. The fact that she turned her back on Norma Dumont and ran for her life, she needs to be cut from the organization. The fact that I'm putting her in a cuts video for an event that she didn't even fight on, we need to cut Chelsea Chandler. She's only on a 1-fight losing streak against Norma Dumont, but the fact that she got clipped so hard, she turned her back and sprinted like Forrest Gump. She has a horrible skill set. She's a horrible striker. And the fact that she's turning her back and sprinting like she is some sort of track star, I just had to put her on the UFC London's cut list. Honestly, Chelsea Chandler does not deserve to be announced by Joe Martinez. She does not deserve to be announced by Bruce Buffer. Chelsea Chandler, that Norma Dumont meme was one of the most embarrassing moments I've seen in UFC history for a fighter to do in the cage. She pulled a CJ Vergara, which was actually embarrassing, but the fact she straight up turned her back and ran until her face ran straight into the cage, she needs to be cut from the organization, and I just had to include her in this video, even though I knew a lot of people weren't going to be expecting it because she fought at the Apex the week before UFC London. But Chelsea Chandler, embarrassing performance against Norma Dumont. I want her out of the organization. I never want to hear Joe Martinez say her name again. So let me know what you guys think of this entire list. I greatly appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.